Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Messerly, and I'm so excited to be interviewing Brittany Hodak today, who is an author and huge speaker, and previously started the Superfan company that was a huge success. So she was on Shark Tank and is seen now all over the mortgage industry. So Brittany, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Yeah, me too. So I want to start out. You did an awesome interview with Dave Savage on Mortgage Coach, talking about the superfan. So I recommend everyone check that out. But briefly, why don't you share a little bit about what the superfan, like what it means to be a superfan, and kind of how you got started in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. So the shortest definition I can kind of give is a super fan is a customer that creates more customers for you, which is the kind of customer we all want, right? Regardless of the industry you're in, but especially if you're in the mortgage industry or really any sales-based industry, you want customers that are bringing more customers to you without you having to ask. And so that's sort of the definition of a super fan. I have a longer 4-part definition that people can check out if they want to. But basically, it's somebody who over-indexes in their affinity for you, which makes them more likely to advocate on your behalf as part of their everyday life. So people are just out there advocating for you, evangelizing, bringing new customers to you without you even having to ask. And I got started in this because my entire background is in the entertainment industry. So I started working at a radio station when I was 16 years old, and that sort of ruined every possibility of me ever having like a normal job. I was like, oh, you get paid to hang out with rock stars? Like that's a thing people can do? Yes, like sign me up. So I've always worked for entertainment companies, record labels, ad agencies, things like that. And I started to get really obsessed with what makes some artists connect in really big ways when others fail. And then looking at brands and saying what makes some brand launches super successful when others fail, that might have 3 times the amount of spend or be, objectively like a better product, but they just don't work. And what is it? And so what I started to find was the answer in entertainment was very similar to the answer in the brand world, which was very similar to every other vertical I looked at, which is the things that work are the things that connect to people in a real, tangible way, the things that become part of someone's story, right? So your favorite artist probably has a song that's touched your life in some way that you can connect emotionally to something that was happening in your life when you heard it. Your favorite products, the same thing. They make your life better. Your friends, your favorite partners that you work with, your colleagues, your coworkers, they enhance your life in some way, right? And so that's where I really started to delve into the psychographics behind this idea of super fandom. What is it that makes us opt into something and say, I love this, I want it to become part of my story, and I'm going to share it with all of the people around me because I want their lives to be enhanced by this product or service the same way mine has been.
So good. I love that. And something I speak a lot on how to reach millennials and next generation shifts. And I think that's something that, probably has always existed to some extent, but you definitely see that a lot with the younger generation around people feeling like they own a piece of what you're doing because it is part of their story, and they tend to be amazing marketers for you if they do believe in your product. Is that something you're seeing kind of shift towards a younger demographic a little bit more so, or is there a difference there?
Absolutely. So there was a really interesting study that Viacom did a few years ago that showed more than 2/3 of millennials and Gen Z people feel some sort of real ownership in the things that they are fans of. And if you look across social media, this phenomena of fandoms existing, and that, the stan, whether it's for a sports team or a TV show or an entertainer, these people feeling like not only do they have ownership, but they're sort of responsible for co-creating the universe in some ways. And it's a really interesting time that we live in, and it's something that if you go back and you look over past decades and generations, this is something that's always been a part of human culture. It's just looked very different. But like when my grandparents were listening to pop music in the 60s, they would join fan clubs, right? Like they had like their fan clubs that they would join where they were getting stuff in the mail and they had their little fanzines. And so this has always looked different. And even all the way back to the Bible, one of my goals this year was I wanted to read the Bible from start to finish, just because I never had, and I was like, it's the best selling book of all time, I should check check it out. And it's so fascinating to see, the talk about fandoms of different things all the way back in the Old Testament. And it's just, I think it's always been part of human nature to want to find something that we connect to in some way that helps us sort the chaos, right? Like, to find the signal in the noise, so to speak, of something that we can say, I belong to this, or I like this, or I connect with this. And then that helps us discover communities among other people who share those same interests. So yes, I think this is something that exists in a very fascinating way in today's social media landscape, in a way that we can see it in real time happening all over the world. But I think it's the reason that it's so powerful and that it resonates so deeply is because it's connected to something that's much deeper, sort of inbred into the human condition.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up story earlier, and I think we've been hearing a lot about storytelling in the last few years and how big that's become with brands and all that kind of stuff. But as you mentioned, it's been alive and well since the existence of human beings. But do you see that kind of is there a shift in the way that brands are telling stories today, and how does that play into developing superfans?
Yes, so there's absolutely a shift in brands being more cognizant of telling their story. And I think the reason that's happening is because brands and salespeople are starting to realize that in order for people to share your story, they need to understand your story, right? And not just what the product means to them, but why the product exists in the world, or why the service exists in the world, or why that service professional is doing what they do. So I have, for anybody who's seen a keynote this year, I have a keynote that I do where I use the acronym SUPER, that I talk about how to create super fans. And the S stands for start with your story. And you've got to really understand what your story is, what your why is, what your connection to the world is. And then U stands for understand your customer story. And it's all about asking the right kinds of questions to get to, their deeper motivations of why they need what you have and what the emotional connection is, so that you really know, yes, as a brand or as a company or a small business owner, you may have one story, but there are lots of different facets to it that you can sort of amplify or de-emphasize depending on who you're talking to make sure that it's the right fit for whoever that customer is. It's like if you're going on 10 different dates with 10 different guys, you might, emphasize different things about your personality based on what their interests are, because you're looking for those areas of intersection, like where the Venn diagram crosses. I always say where your story intersects with their story, that's where the superfan magic happens. That overlap is where you have the potential to create the kind of engaged customers that are going to refer more customers to you in the long run.
I love that. And I want you to share the rest of that acronym, but real quick, I heard you say something on that mortgage coach interview about that treat others the way that they want to be treated. And I've been saying that forever, because when I started, I was a social worker and I worked with different immigrant communities, and I realized how, I couldn't treat others the way that I would want to be treated, because I had a different worldview than a lot of my customers did. And so it required translating my message, not just across language, but across culture and, and often generations and that kind of thing. So I didn't realize that came from a book I think you mentioned, but it really plays into that fact of like, how do you tell your story in a way that does connect with the customer story? It's not just your story, it's also like translating that to your customer.
Yeah, it's a great book called The Platinum Rule. And, it really does trickle down to every single thing about the way you do business, all the way down to something seemingly small like communication. Just because you might like to get text messages, you might have a customer who hates to receive text messages and finds it intrusive, or you may love to follow your customers on Instagram, but they may find it to be an overstep, or vice versa. So really the only way to know is to ask people how they want to interact with you at every single step of the way, and customize that experience, because you really want to show people that they're appreciated. I love acronyms. That's anybody who's seen any of my content knows that I have like an acronym for everything. And another acronym that I use a lot is WAVE, and it's what I call my superfan wave. And WAVE stands for welcomed, appreciated, validated, and engaged. And I feel like those are the 4 big steps that you should aim to make all of your potential customers and existing customers feel. And a big part of the second one, which is appreciation, person is treating them the way they want to be treated, showing them that their thoughts and feelings and concerns matter to you. And that's why you're not only asking about them, but you're then changing the way that you do business to benefit them so that you're giving them the absolute best experience possible. It's like when you go to Build-A-Bear and you say like, I want this, this, and this, and like everybody's Build-A-Bear is different. Like you want every customer's experience with you to be catered exactly to what their needs are.
So good. I love that. So tell me more about the rest of the acronym PER.
Oh, yes. Okay. So super. Start with your story. Understand your customer story. Personalize strategically. That goes back to the sort of Build-A-Bear of creating the experience for them. Exceed expectations. That's a big one. Look at your customer journey. Look at every single opportunity and think about what your customer is probably expecting based on maybe other people that they've worked with in the past, or just what they were, maybe thinking that whatever step in the journey would be like. Look for ways to exceed their expectations. And again, there's countless ways to do this. There's no right answer, but how can you exceed their expectations? And then the R stands for repeat, because you've got to do these things over and over and over again. And when I say repeat, I don't mean automation, although CRMs are super important, but I mean the personal aspects, the personal touch that you go back to and repeat over and over and over again. Nobody ever became a super fan because they were like moved in to the right part of your funnel, or they were put in the right drip campaign. Nobody was ever like, oh man, that 17th email really got me. So it's, when I say repeat, it's not so much automation. It's more about being systematic about the way you enhance the experience for your customers over and over again.
I love it. And I cannot wait to see your full keynote at some point. But thank you for giving us a little bit of a preview. I want to be cognizant of your time, but I also want to get to know you a little bit better. We have a lot of I think that I and many people in my audience would really love to hear about how you got started in your business, and some of the things that you wish you'd known in becoming a leader. Some tips for us to learn in your journey.
Thank you. Okay. I'll answer those two things separately. I'm going to start, I think, with the thing that I wish that I had known, because I think this is relevant, regardless of my journey or anybody else's journey. And this is something that, I've really sort of only discovered in the last couple of years, which is you've really got to define what success and happiness means to you, and decide what you want your life to look like, and make all of your decisions based around that. So I hear so many people, especially young people, talk about like, when I retire, or when I do this, or when I make $1 million, or when I XYZ, whatever. And, I started thinking about, I've been so future focused on a lot of stuff that I haven't taken time to build the life I want right now, and say, what do I need to do to have exactly the life I want right now? So I started thinking about, all of the things I was doing and how they aligned with my personal and professional goals. And my personal goal is to spend as much time as I can with my husband and my son. And my professional goal was to be one of the best known, most respected speakers on customer engagement. And so I looked at everything that I was doing across my startup and my writing and everything, and said, if something doesn't align with what I have set as my goal, then why am I doing it? Because when I looked at like a pie chart of my time, I was splitting my time across so many different projects. At the end of last year, like I was hosting a podcast for a client, and I was doing consulting for 5 or 6 different clients, and I was still running my business day to day, and I was writing for like 9 different websites, and all of these things that I was doing because they were fun, or they were interesting, or because I'd gotten feedback that I was really good at it. And we all like to do things that people tell us we're great at. But when I looked at it, I said, I'm sort of running in all of these different directions. It was like a snowflake rather than, like a lightning bolt of all the momentum headed to the same thing. So I said, I'm going to clear away everything that is not supporting my goal of becoming the best speaker in the world, or at least the best speaker that I can be in the subject matter that I speak on, because that's what's going to ultimately give me the most freedom to spend time with my husband and son, to prioritize my family, and also feel like I'm, doing a great job in my business. So anything that didn't align with that priority was taken away. And that's the one thing that I think I wish I had known sooner, is that if you can figure out what your goals are for right now, for relatively short term, medium term, long term, make every decision based on those goals. And if something is not a fit for your goal, don't feel bad about saying no. Like I used to say yes to a lot of things just because I felt really guilty for saying no, or again, because I was like, well, this person is a friend or they're a client or they've told me that I'm really good at it. But just because you're good at something doesn't mean you need to do it for the rest of your life. If it's not bringing you joy, if it's not getting you closer to ultimately where you want to be, then you're spending time that's a very precious resource that you're never going to be able to make more of on something that, you know, isn't furthering where you ultimately want to be. And that's time that you could be spending getting to where you want to be. So that's something that I wish I'd known sooner, is thinking about sort of like the lightning bolt instead of the snowflake. And then to answer your other question, well, that's a lot. Do you want me to
Wait,
pause for a
pause
second?
there. I'm like, I need to sink all of that in. First of all, yeah, really good advice, and it is hitting me really hard. Do you feel like, you know, whenever you are being spread thin, like for instance, I recently was talking to a business coach, Meg Daly, who said you need to lay out your values first and then filter your decisions through those values. Do you feel like, did you have a hard time with making sure that you had those values right to begin with? I mean, I think it's pretty easy for you to say you want to spend more time with your husband and your son, but in terms of your business direction, what was that process like for you to filter out and like cut some pretty serious things, it sounds like, out of your life in order to meet those goals?
Yeah, well, I love that criteria that Meg set out. That's super smart. And yeah, honestly, it was really hard. And the hardest part was virtually walking away from a business that I started almost a decade ago, that I had to look at and say, you know, I love this company. I've poured my heart and soul into this company for almost 10 years. It's a business plan that I wrote when I was in college, that I spent the first 5 years after college getting all of the connections and the knowledge that I needed to be able to start this company. So it was certainly hard to walk away from that. But I also had to look at it and say, is me staying at this company the best thing for the company, the employees, for myself, for my family? And what I ultimately found is that, you know, it wasn't the best thing for me and it wasn't the best thing for my family. And that's what had to matter most, you know? And I said, that's ultimately, my values are that I'm placing my family before anything else. So even if there are going to be clients that are going to be really upset, you know, I'm going to give them notice. I'm going to let them know that I'll do everything I can to make it a smooth transition. I'm going to help them find other service providers, but I can't keep doing something that's not best for my family just because it's best for a client or just because it's best for an employee. And that was the value that was sort of hard for me to finally catch up in my life to where I knew that I needed to be. Like, I feel like a lot of times I make decisions a little bit too late based on not wanting to negatively affect or impact other people. And I know a lot of women who do that, right? We always sort of put everyone else first before ourselves. But what I ultimately have learned over the past couple of years as a mom is, you know, your family has to come first. And for your family to come first and for you to show up for your family in a real way, you've got to prioritize your own happiness too. Because like, I know I'm not at my best as a mom or, you know, as a professional if I've had 3 hours of sleep or if I haven't had a shower in 2 days or, you know, whatever. Like, when we don't take care of ourselves, we can't show up the way we want to for those around us too. At least that's something that's become true for me. So for me, it was all about saying, you know, I've got to make this decision because this is the right decision. And again, just because you're good at something doesn't mean it's the path you're supposed to be on. And it doesn't mean you have to do it for the rest of your life. I really felt like I was kind of a professional dabbler. You know, I was like, I'm turning 35 years old and I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. You know, I'm doing these like 9 different things. And it was really a couple things that happened within a few days of each other towards the end of last year that sort of opened my eyes. One, my niece, who's 17 now and was applying for colleges, she was 16 at the time. She was like, Aunt Britt, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And I was like, welcome to the club, sweetheart. Like, I'm twice as old as you and I have no idea. I'm doing like 11 different things. And a couple days after that conversation, I was at a party with a friend and he was introducing me to a friend of his. And he was like, this is my friend Brittany. And he just started going on. And he was like, maybe you should introduce him, Brittany. I'm like 45 seconds in and I haven't even covered all of the things you do. Cause he's like, oh, she founded this company and she's hosting this podcast and she's a speaker who's going all over the country doing these great keynotes and she writes for Forbes and Adweek. And he just kept going on. And I was like, okay, if somebody who's been a friend of mine for years needs like a full minute to rattle off just what I'm working on right now, like maybe I should filter some of these things out.
Yeah, gosh, that is so funny. I constantly, when people ask what I do, I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it because it's just, and I think as women, a lot of times we do like to multitask and we do like to take on projects if we're good at them or we enjoy them. But I was just reading this book, Game Changers, which is so good. And he has a chapter in there about how what makes you happy, or what, being wealthy doesn't make you happy, but being happy might make you wealthy, or something to that effect. And I was thinking about how if we have so many things going, it might, even if we enjoy all those things, that's not actually going to make you happy because you're spread too thin, and even if each of those things are bringing in revenue, it probably is still holding you back to some extent. So I think it's a really good idea for all of us to constantly be kind of paring those down and narrowing in on what we really want to move the needle on.
Yeah, and one thing I heard, I don't know who said this. It was advice that I heard a couple of years ago on like a podcast, and I thought that is so smart. Somebody said if you're having trouble narrowing and trying to figure out what you want to do, think about what made you happy when you were a kid. Like when you were a kid, before the world like had any expectations on you, what did you like to do? What brought you joy? And now as an adult in your free time, what is it that you dream about doing, or what is it that you think about doing, or when you do find yourself like on vacation with free time at the beach, like what is it that you want to do? And really, because it's hard. Like it should be such an easy question on the surface to say like, what do I want to do? But it's hard, right? It's one of those things that I think a lot of people hit this sort of wall of like, oh my gosh, like, is it too late for me to change careers? Or what if I try this new thing and it doesn't work? Or I have no idea how to start over. And, so like all of those sort of fears keep us from saying like, I'm going to just pick one thing and like run as fast and as hard as I can in that direction until I break through that wall.
Yeah, gosh, that's so good. Well, I know I have a lot to think about, and I really appreciate you sharing so much of your time and expertise with us. Is there anything else that you would want to share, I guess, and related to superfans or your career development as a whole?
No, thank you so much for having me on. This has been so much fun, and I hope it's helpful. I do have a free ebook that anybody who wants to check out can get. It's just on my website, which is brittanyhodak.com/wave, WAVE, and that's one of the acronyms that I talked about earlier. So anybody who wants to check it out can download it for free, or follow me on my socials where I share lots of other acronyms all the time as they sort of pop into my brain.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brittany. It was great talking with you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. This was so much fun, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, bye.
Bye.